You replay the conversation in your head for the third time tonight. Something about it felt wrong. Not the words. The words were fine. Reasonable, even. But somewhere in the middle of it, you agreed to something you didn't want to agree to. You apologized for something you didn't do. You found yourself explaining, defending, justifying, and you're still not sure how you got there. That's the part that keeps you up. Not the conversation itself. The fact that you can't find the exact moment it turned. Maybe it was a colleague who always seems to need something from you at the worst possible time, and somehow it's always urgent, and somehow you always deliver. Maybe it's a partner who can turn any disagreement into a referendum on whether you're a good person. Maybe it's a friend whose silence feels louder than anyone else's shouting, and you've caught yourself performing for that silence, trying to earn your way back into it. You tell yourself you're overthinking. You tell yourself it's probably nothing. But your body already knows what your mind is still negotiating with. Something in that exchange was not a conversation. It was a contest. And you didn't know you were in one. This isn't a flaw in your character. It's a gap in your training. And it can be closed. 25 centuries ago, a general named Sun Tzu wrote a text that has outlasted every empire that ever tried to apply it. Not because it taught men how to swing a sword, but because it taught them how to see clearly before the swords were ever drawn. Sun Tzu understood something that most people never learn. The outcome of most conflicts is decided long before the visible confrontation begins. It's decided in preparation, in self-command, in the ability to read a situation without the fog of your own reactivity clouding the picture. He is famous for a single idea that applies as much to a boardroom or a bedroom as it ever did to a battlefield. Know yourself and know the one across from you, and you need not fear the outcome. Today we're going to walk through 7 signs that you are being maneuvered, not necessarily by a villain, sometimes just by someone skilled, sometimes by someone desperate, sometimes by someone who doesn't even know they're doing it. And for each sign, we're going to extract Sun Tzu's exact strategic response. Not a script of clever comebacks, but an internal discipline that makes you very difficult to move. By the end, you'll understand why the 6th sign is the one almost nobody catches. The one that doesn't attack your position, but your certainty that you have eyes at all. Stay until we get there. It changes how you read every conversation that comes after it. Chapter 1. The manufactured emergency. The first sign is simple, and it hides in plain sight. Someone keeps creating urgency you didn't ask for. A message arrives that needs an answer right now. A decision gets compressed into a 5-minute window that never needed to be 5 minutes. A request comes wrapped in a deadline that materialized out of nowhere, and somehow, every time. The deadline benefits them and costs you. Urgency is one of the oldest tools of influence there is, because urgency disables your best thinking. Under time pressure, the analytical part of your mind goes quiet, and the reflexive part takes over. You stop asking, is this true? Is this fair? Is this what I actually want? And start asking only, how do I make this feeling stop? That's the trade someone is making when they hand you an artificial emergency. They are trading your judgment for your compliance, and they are doing it on a clock they control. Sun Tzu built an entire doctrine around this exact vulnerability, though he aimed it at armies rather than individuals. He taught that the force which is rested, prepared, and unhurried holds the advantage over the force that is exhausted, reactive, and arriving late to its own decisions. He called this the difference between the host and the guest. The host who chooses the ground and the timing, and the guest who is always arriving somewhere on someone else's schedule, always slightly behind, always slightly scrambling. Every time you let someone else's manufactured deadline dictate your response, you volunteer to be the guest in your own life. It's worth being precise here, because not every deadline is manufactured. Some fires are real. A genuine crisis deserves a genuine, urgent response, and pretending otherwise is its own kind of self-delusion. The distinction Sun Tzu would want you to draw isn't urgent versus not urgent. It's whose clock is this, and does the timeline actually match the stakes? A real emergency usually has consequences that are concrete, specific, and independent of your reaction to it. A manufactured one tends to have a strange elasticity. The deadline was 5 minutes ago urgent, but somehow, the one time you didn't answer immediately, the emergency quietly resolved itself without you. That elasticity is the tell. Real fires don't wait patiently to see if you'll notice them. Consider a composite figure. We'll call him Daniel. Daniel ran client relationships for a mid-sized firm, and there was one client, a demanding account named Reyes, who had a habit of emailing at 6 p.m. on a Friday with something that absolutely had to be resolved by Monday morning. For 2 years, Daniel gave up his weekends to these emergencies. He answered fast, worked frantically, delivered under pressure, and somehow the respect he expected in return never arrived. Instead, the emergencies kept coming because he had taught Reyes, without meaning to, that urgency was the fastest way to get Daniel's full attention and best effort. The pattern broke the week Daniel didn't answer the Friday email until Monday at 9. Nothing burned down. The world did not end. And something shifted in how Reyes spoke to him afterward, not worse, but with more respect, the way people speak to someone who has demonstrated they are not owned by a clock. This tracks with what modern behavioral research has found about decision-making under artificial time constraint. Pressure narrows attention and increases reliance on quick, low-effort judgment rather than deliberate reasoning, which is precisely the state in which people make agreements they later regret. The manufactured emergency isn't accidental. It's a tool that works because it exploits something real about how minds under pressure behave. Sun Tzu's response is not to ignore all urgency. Some fires are real. His response is to interrogate the clock before you obey it. Ask, whose deadline is this? What actually happens if I take 1 hour, 1 day, before I answer? 9 times out of 10, the honest answer is, nothing happens except that I get my mind back. The strategic response to a manufactured emergency is not speed. It's the deliberate, visible refusal to be rushed, because the moment you demonstrate that urgency doesn't move you, most manufactured emergencies quietly stop being manufactured. There was never a real fire. There was only a person who had learned that panic was a lever, and you had never shown them the lever didn't work on you. There's a practical version of this you can start using today. When something arrives dressed as an emergency, build in one deliberate pause before you respond, not to be difficult, but to separate the actual stakes from the manufactured feeling of the moment. Ask yourself what genuinely happens if you take an hour, a day. Write the honest answer down if you have to. In almost every case, the honest answer is very little, except that you get to make the decision with your full mind intact instead of your panicked one. That single pause, repeated consistently, is the entire discipline. It costs you almost nothing, and it returns to you something urgency was quietly taking without your consent, your own timing. Chapter 2. The over-explaining trap. The second sign is quieter and far more common. You find yourself justifying, defending, and re-explaining a simple position over and over to someone who was never actually confused about what you meant. Watch for this pattern. You say something reasonable. The other person responds not by disagreeing with the content, but by acting as though what you said didn't quite make sense, wasn't quite clear, wasn't quite fair. So you explain it again, a little more carefully. They still seem unconvinced. So you add more context, more caveats, more reasons why your position is legitimate. An hour later, you have delivered a small legal defense for something that required no defense at all, a preference, a boundary, a simple no. This is one of the most effective and least visible forms of pressure that exists, because it doesn't look like pressure, it looks like a conversation. But every additional explanation you offer is a small transfer of power. You are, without realizing it, treating your own position as something on trial, And the moment you accept that frame, you have already lost ground, regardless of what you eventually decide. Sun Tzu's core teaching on this is about concealment, not deception in the sense of lying, but the strategic principle that you do not owe your full internal reasoning to someone who has not earned it and does not require it. He taught that the skilled strategist appears unfathomable to an opponent, not because he is hiding wrongdoing, but because his position does not depend on winning an argument about his own motives. A boundary that requires a 15-minute defense was never really a boundary. It was a request for permission. There's a useful cross-validation here from negotiation research. Skilled negotiators are consistently trained to give brief, confident rationale and then stop, rather than escalating explanation in response to pushback, because additional explanation past a certain point reads as weakness and invites further probing rather than resolving it. The first no, that doesn't work for me, is often the strongest version of the sentence you will ever say. Every version after it is usually weaker because it signals that the door is still, in fact, slightly open. Consider a composite figure. We'll call her Priya. Priya's mother had a gift for making ordinary decisions, where Priya spent a holiday, how Priya raised her kids, what Priya did with her own money, into extended debates that Priya somehow always ended up losing, not because her mother's arguments were better, but because Priya kept supplying more material to argue against. Every explanation Priya offered became a new thread her mother could pull. The exhausting part wasn't the disagreement, it was that Priya kept handing over ammunition. It's worth noting what Priya's mother's questions actually sounded like, because they rarely announced themselves as attacks. "I just don't understand why you do it that way" is a sentence that sounds, on the surface, like genuine curiosity. Repeated 4 or 5 times across a single phone call, each time after Priya had already answered clearly, it stopped being curiosity and became something closer to a toll. A fee Priya kept paying in the currency of her own certainty over and over for a receipt that never actually arrived. What changed wasn't Priya's relationship with her mother. It was Priya's relationship with the silence after her own sentences. She learned to say what she meant once, clearly, and then let the silence sit there, uncomfortable, unfilled, hers to hold. Her mother pushed for a while, testing whether the old lever still worked. It didn't, not because Priya got colder, because she stopped auditioning for a verdict that was never actually going to be handed down fairly. The strategic response to this second sign is not silence as punishment, it's silence as sovereignty. State your position once, clearly, without a chorus of justification trailing behind it, and then let it stand on its own. If someone keeps circling back for more explanation after you've already been clear, that circling is rarely confusion. It's a search for the seam where you'll start doubting yourself. Don't hand them the seam. There's a particular discomfort in this discipline worth naming honestly, because pretending it isn't there would be dishonest coaching. Stopping at one clear sentence, instead of the familiar flood of justification, will feel wrong the first several times you try it. Too abrupt, almost rude, like you've left something unfinished. That discomfort is not a sign you're doing it incorrectly. It's a sign you're breaking a habit that over-explaining trained into you, the belief that your reasoning is only valid once someone else has approved of it. You don't need a verdict on your own preferences. You need only state them clearly enough that a reasonable listener understands them, and then trust that clarity to do its own work, without you standing behind it, still defending. Chapter 3. The shifting ground, the third sign, is harder to name. Because it doesn't attack what you said, it attacks the ground you're standing on while you say it. You raise a specific concern, you were late again, and somehow the conversation drifts to how you're always so negative. You bring up a specific broken agreement, and it becomes a conversation about your tone for bringing it up. The original issue, the actual terrain, quietly disappears, replaced by a new terrain that's much harder to defend and much easier for the other person to control. This is what Sun Tzu called reading the ground, understanding your actual position, actual resources, actual circumstances clearly, rather than the story someone else is currently telling about them. He taught that a general who does not know the terrain he stands on will be defeated regardless of the size of his army, because he is fighting a battle that isn't the real one. The most dangerous version of this isn't when someone lies to you outright. It's when they redraw the map while you're still looking at the old one, so that you keep responding to a reality that no longer matches the one you're actually standing in. The tell is almost always the same. The subject changes, but your discomfort stays exactly where it was, or gets worse. That mismatch, subject moved, feeling unchanged, is often the clearest signal you have that the terrain shifted out from under you on purpose or out of habit, rather than by honest accident. Consider a composite figure. We'll call him Marcus. Marcus managed a small team and one report. A talented but combative employee named Diaz had a consistent pattern. Anytime Marcus raised a performance issue, Diaz would pivot to how Marcus never appreciated his contributions, how the team was toxic, how Marcus was the real problem. Marcus, wanting to be fair, wanting to be a good manager, would find himself defending his leadership instead of addressing the missed deadline that started the conversation. Every single time the original issue evaporated. Every single time Marcus walked away feeling like the one under review. What Marcus eventually learned to do wasn't argue harder about who the real problem was. It was hold the terrain. When Diaz pivoted, Marcus would simply return, "I hear that. We can talk about that separately. Right now, I want to finish talking about the deadline. Not aggressive, not defensive, just a refusal to let the map get redrawn mid-conversation." There's a real echo of this in how clinicians describe reality distortion in high-conflict relationships. The person on the receiving end often reports a specific sensation of losing the thread, an inability to remember what the conversation was originally about, because the ground kept moving faster than they could re-anchor. Naming the original terrain out loud, "We were talking about X," is one of the simplest, most effective ways to interrupt that drift, because it forces the conversation back onto solid ground instead of the shifting one. Some researchers who study high-conflict communication describe this technique under a simpler name, the broken record, calmly repeating the same anchor point, regardless of how many directions the conversation tries to pull it. And note that its power lies precisely in its refusal to escalate or elaborate. It doesn't win by out-arguing the pivot. It wins by declining to be moved by it, indefinitely, for as long as the pivot keeps happening. Sun Tzu's response here is not to win the argument about whose map is correct. It's to refuse to abandon your own map in the first place. Know the actual terrain, the actual facts, the actual sequence of events, the actual issue at hand, well enough that you can return to it calmly, again and again, without getting pulled into the newer, murkier terrain someone else is trying to move you onto. The strategist who knows the ground cannot be maneuvered off it, because he never loses sight of where he's actually standing. This takes more repetition than people expect, because the pivot rarely happens just once. Expect it to happen 3, 4, 5 times in a single conversation, especially with someone who has relied on this maneuver successfully for years. Each time, the response stays the same, almost boringly so. Acknowledge the new terrain briefly, decline to be pulled onto it, and return. That might be worth its own conversation. Right now, I want to finish this one. Said the same way, every time, without frustration creeping into your voice, because frustration is itself a signal that the pivot is working, even partially. The boring, repetitive steadiness is the entire strategy. It is not exciting. It is not clever. It is simply very difficult to argue with someone who will not leave the terrain they came to discuss. Chapter 4. The provoked reaction, the fourth sign, is the one most people mistake for their own failing. Someone finds the exact words, the exact tone, the exact moment that makes you snap, and then treats your reaction as the actual problem. You raise something calmly. They escalate slightly. You stay calm. They escalate a little more, hit something tender, something close to an old wound, and finally, you react. Your voice rises. You say something sharper than you meant to. And suddenly, the entire conversation is about your reaction, not the original issue, not the provocation that led to it. Your outburst, isolated from its context, becomes the whole story. This is one of the oldest maneuvers there is, and Sun Tzu addressed it directly. He warned that a quick-tempered general can be provoked into rash and disadvantageous action by an opponent who simply needles him until he loses composure. The provoking side doesn't need to win the substance of the disagreement. They only need you to lose your composure in front of a witness, or in front of yourself, and the rest handles itself. Your reaction becomes the evidence they use against your entire position. This is why Sun Tzu treated emotional discipline not as a soft virtue, but as the central military asset. Because an undisciplined emotional state is functionally an opponent's easiest target. He called for the general to be as calm and inscrutable as still water, hard to read, hard to rattle, because the moment your emotional state becomes visible and predictable, it becomes something an opponent can pull on like a lever. There's a well-established finding in psychological research on this exact mechanism, the practice known as cognitive reappraisal. Mentally reframing a provocation measurably reduces the emotional charge of the moment and the intensity of the reaction that follows. The tool isn't suppression, swallowing the feeling and pretending it isn't there. It's recognition, correctly identifying what's actually happening in the exchange before your nervous system decides what to do about it. Consider a composite figure, we'll call her Anaya. Anaya had a sibling, Theo, who had an uncanny ability to bring up their childhood, their parents' obvious favoritism, in the middle of any disagreement about something completely unrelated, splitting a bill, planning a holiday. Every time Anaya would get pulled into defending decades-old grievances, her voice would rise. And the actual conversation, the bill, the holiday, would be abandoned entirely. Theo would later describe her as the dramatic one, and for years that description stuck because Anaya kept providing the evidence for it. The shift came when Anaya started silently naming the pattern the moment she felt her chest tighten. This is the childhood card, right on schedule. Naming it, even just to herself, created a half-second of distance between the provocation and her response, enough distance to choose her next sentence instead of firing one off. We can talk about that another time. Right now I'm asking about the bill, said flatly, said without heat. The bait sat there, unaccepted, and for the first time in years, Theo had nothing to escalate into. The strategic response to a provoked reaction is not to become unfeeling, it's to recognize the bait as bait, in real time, before your body commits to swallowing it. The person who stays composed under deliberate provocation doesn't win by being colder. They win by remaining the only person in the exchange whose actions still match their actual interests, rather than someone else's script. It helps to understand why this specific tactic works so reliably, even on people who consider themselves calm and reasonable. Provocation rarely aims at a random target. It aims at your oldest, most tender material, the thing you were criticized for as a child, the insecurity you've spent years quietly managing, the comparison that still stings no matter how much progress you've made. This is not an accident, it is precision. The person provoking you, whether consciously or not, has usually located the one subject that reliably bypasses your composure, and they return to it because it has worked before. Knowing this in advance changes the entire experience of the provocation. It's no longer a mystery why this particular sentence landed so hard. It landed hard because it was aimed well, and aim, once you can see it, is far easier to step out of the way of. There's a useful physical practice underneath the mental one, worth mentioning plainly, the half second between provocation and reaction is where all of this discipline actually lives, and that half second can be lengthened with something as simple as one deliberate breath before you speak. Not dramatically, not visibly, just enough space to let the reappraisal happen before the words leave your mouth. Sun Tzu's still water isn't water that feels nothing. It's water that has enough depth that surface disturbances don't immediately become the whole story. Chapter 5. The test of withdrawal, the fifth sign, is subtle enough that most people never clock it as manipulation at all. Someone goes quiet, or pulls back, or grows cold, not because anything happened, but specifically to see whether you'll chase. The warmth disappears without explanation. The replies get shorter. The invitations stop coming from their side. And you, uneasy with the sudden distance, uncertain what you did wrong, start reaching. More texts, more check-ins, more effort to close a gap you didn't open. What you don't always notice is that the moment you start chasing, the withdrawal has already done its job. It wasn't really about distance. It was a test of what you'll do when distance appears. Sun Tzu had a name for this exact dynamic, applied to armies rather than people. He taught that a skilled strategist can bait an opponent by appearing weak, retreating, or disengaging, and the undisciplined opponent, sensing an opening or fearing loss, rushes forward exactly where the strategist wanted him. He called this using an appearance of inferiority to draw the enemy on. The retreat isn't real weakness. It's an invitation to overextend yourself. Not every withdrawal is a manipulation. Sometimes people genuinely need space. And treating every silence as a trap is its own kind of exhausting distortion. The sign to watch isn't the withdrawal itself. It's the pattern. Does the coldness reliably appear right when you've asserted a boundary? And does it reliably resolve the moment you've chased hard enough to prove your investment? If withdrawal functions as a lever that gets pulled whenever they want more from you, that's not space, that's strategy. Consider a composite figure. We'll call him Elliot. Elliot was dating someone, Farah, who had an unusual rhythm. Anytime Elliot expressed a need, wanting more consistency, more clarity about where things were headed, Farah would go quiet for days. No fight, no explanation, just distance. And every time, Elliot's fear of losing her would override the original need entirely. He'd apologize for bringing it up, overfunction to close the gap, and the relationship would reset, with Elliot slightly smaller than before, having learned that his needs came with a cost he'd rather not pay again. What eventually broke the pattern wasn't confrontation. It was Elliot simply not chasing the next time the silence appeared. He didn't escalate, didn't sulk, didn't send the anxious follow-up text. He continued his week. The silence, robbed of an audience racing to close it, stopped being useful, and for the first time, it was Farah who reached out first, unprompted, without the leverage she'd relied on. The strategic response Sun Tzu offers here is discipline of pursuit, the wisdom to recognize that not every gap needs to be closed by you, and that the side who can tolerate distance without panicking holds more actual power than the side who cannot. This doesn't mean going cold in return or playing games back. It means simply not treating someone else's withdrawal as an emergency that only your chasing can resolve. Let the distance exist. Watch what it reveals. This is genuinely one of the harder disciplines on this list, because tolerating a gap without closing it runs directly against a very old, very human instinct. The fear that distance, left unaddressed, becomes permanent. Most of the time, that fear is exactly what the withdrawal is counting on. The discomfort you feel sitting with an unanswered message, an unresolved silence, is not a signal that something is wrong with the relationship. It is simply the discomfort of not being in control of someone else's timeline, a discomfort that fades with practice. The same way any unfamiliar posture feels awkward before it feels natural. You are not being asked to stop caring. You are being asked to stop confusing your own anxiety with an accurate map of the situation. Chapter 6. When they make you doubt what you saw now, we reach the sign almost nobody catches in real time. The one that doesn't attack your position, or your patience, or your composure. It attacks something much deeper, your basic confidence that your own perception can be trusted at all. This is the moment. Sit with it, because this is where the real cost of manipulation is paid. You remember a conversation clearly. They insist it didn't happen that way, or didn't happen at all. You recall a promise. They act as though you invented it. You notice a pattern repeating for the 5th time. They tell you, calmly, reasonably, that you're reading into things, that you're too sensitive, that you're remembering it wrong. And here is the devastating part, because they say it so calmly, so consistently, so without visible malice, you start to believe them. Not immediately. Slowly, one small self-doubt at a time, until you've quietly outsourced your own memory to someone who has a clear interest in you not trusting it. This is the deepest form of manipulation there is, because every other sign we've covered so far attacks your response. This one attacks your instrument, the very ability you'd use to notice any of the other 6 signs in the first place. If someone successfully convinces you that your perception itself is unreliable, they don't need to win any individual argument ever again. You'll do the work of doubting yourself for them, indefinitely, without them lifting a finger. Sun Tzu's entire doctrine begins with a single, non-negotiable foundation, and it is not about the opponent at all. He taught that self-knowledge comes first, that you must know yourself with total clarity before any strategy involving another person can even be attempted. Because a general who does not trust his own read of the situation is defeated before the engagement begins, regardless of what the opponent does. Every map, every maneuver, every calculation Sun Tzu ever offered assumes a general who is standing on solid internal ground. Remove that ground and nothing else he taught can be applied. You cannot execute strategy from a position of self-doubt, because self-doubt is precisely the terrain collapsing beneath you. This is why this sign carries more weight than the other 6 combined. It is not one tactic among many. It is the tactic that, if successful, disables your ability to see any of the others. Here is what almost nobody tells you about this pattern. The antidote is not proving you're right. It's refusing to outsource the question in the first place. You do not need Farah, or Diaz, or Theo, or anyone else to certify that your memory of events is accurate before you're allowed to act on it. Write it down, if you have to. Keep a private record, not to build a case for anyone else, but to protect your own read of reality from slow erosion. Notice when the phrase "you're remembering it wrong" only ever seems to apply to memories that happen to be inconvenient for the person saying it, and never to memories that flatter them. Consider a composite figure. We'll call her Yasmin. Yasmin worked under a director, Whitfield, who had built an entire management style around this single sign. Commitments made in meetings would vanish the following week, denied outright, framed as things Yasmin had misunderstood. Promises about promotion timelines dissolved into "that's not quite what I said." For nearly 2 years, Yasmin genuinely began to distrust her own memory. Began apologizing for things she was almost certain hadn't happened the way she was being told they'd happened, because the alternative, believing her own mind over her boss's calm certainty, felt arrogant, even dangerous. The turn came the day Yasmin started writing a single sentence after every important conversation with Whitfield, just for herself, dated, factual, no interpretation. Nothing changed in how Whitfield behaved. What changed was that Yasmin now had solid ground beneath her own feet that didn't depend on anyone else's agreement to exist. The next time a commitment was denied, she didn't need to win the argument in the moment. She simply knew, privately and completely, what was true, and that private certainty, unshakable because it no longer depended on external validation, was the single most powerful thing she carried into every conversation afterward. What made Yasmin's situation so difficult to escape for as long as it lasted wasn't a lack of intelligence or a lack of self-respect. It was that the erosion happened in increments too small to individually justify alarm. No single denied commitment was, on its own, enough to build a case around. It was only the accumulated pattern, visible after 2 years, that revealed the shape of what had actually been happening, and patterns are notoriously difficult to see from inside them, in real time, one conversation at a time. This is worth remembering. If you're currently in the middle of a pattern like this yourself, you are not failing to notice because you're not paying attention. You're failing to notice because the erosion is designed, whether deliberately or not, to be invisible at the scale of any single interaction. This is the highest stakes discipline in the entire video, because it is the one discipline all the others depend on. You can outweight urgency, you can hold your ground on terrain, you can decline the bait of provocation, you can resist the pull to chase. But none of that is possible if you no longer trust your own eyes. Reclaiming that trust, quietly, privately, without needing anyone else's permission to do so, is not a small act. It is the entire war, fought and won, in a single internal decision. I know what I saw. I don't need you to agree with me for it to be true. Understand what makes this sign categorically different from the 6 before it. Urgency, over-explaining, shifting terrain, provocation, and withdrawal are all pressures applied to a self that is still, fundamentally, intact. You still know who you are while you're resisting them. This 6th sign is different because, left unaddressed, it doesn't pressure the self. It dissolves the ground the self stands on. A person who has been on the receiving end of this pattern for long enough often describes a specific, disorienting sensation, not confusion about a single event, but a general, low-grade unreliability they've come to assume about their own mind, as though their perception itself has become a suspect witness. That sensation, once it takes hold, is exhausting in a way none of the other signs are. Because it doesn't just cost you a single conversation, it costs you your baseline confidence in every conversation after it. This is precisely why Sun Tzu placed self-knowledge before every other strategic principle he ever taught, rather than treating it as one tool among many. Every tactic in this video, reading terrain, conserving energy, declining provocation, withholding your full hand, depends on a strategist who still trusts his own instrument. A general who has been talked out of trusting his own scouts, his own eyes on the field, cannot execute even the simplest maneuver correctly, because he no longer knows what's actually in front of him. This is why the 6th sign deserves to sit at the emotional center of this entire video. It is not one sign among 7. It is the sign that determines whether you're able to recognize any of the other 6 at all. Rebuilding this trust is slow work, and it rarely happens through a single confrontation or a single moment of vindication. It happens through small, private, unglamorous acts of self-corroboration, repeated consistently until they form a floor you can stand on, regardless of what anyone else insists happened. Write things down. Not to build a case to present to anyone, but to protect your own record from the slow revision that happens when you're told, calmly and repeatedly, that you misremember. Notice, specifically, whether the accusation of misremembering only ever seems to travel in one direction, toward memories that are inconvenient for the other person, and never toward memories that happen to serve them. That asymmetry, once you see it clearly, is very difficult to unsee, and it is often the single clearest piece of evidence available to you. Chapter 7. The goalposts that never stop moving. The 7th sign shows up last, because it's the one that appears after you've already done everything right. You meet the request, clear the bar, deliver exactly what was asked, and the bar quietly moves. What was enough yesterday is suddenly not enough today. The goalpost was never fixed. It was only ever going to be wherever you weren't standing. This looks, on the surface, like high standards. It is not. High standards are consistent and knowable in advance. Moving goalposts are defined only in reaction to your progress, always slightly beyond wherever you currently are, so that arriving becomes structurally impossible, no matter how far or how fast you move. Sun Tzu taught that the strategist must know his objective with total clarity before committing his forces, because a campaign fought toward a target that keeps relocating will exhaust every resource without ever producing victory. He also taught the principle of formlessness, the idea that the disciplined strategist adapts fluidly to real, external changes in terrain, the way water reshapes itself around any obstacle. But there is a crucial distinction hiding inside that teaching, one that's easy to miss. Formlessness is about your own adaptability to genuine changes in circumstance. It was never meant as an instruction to keep endlessly reshaping yourself around someone else's shifting, arbitrary demands. Water adapts to terrain. It does not chase a shoreline someone keeps redrawing purely to keep the water moving. The tell here is almost mathematical. Does meeting the standard ever actually produce approval, rest, or closure? Or does meeting it only produce a new, slightly higher standard? If the goalpost has moved every single time you've reached it, across months or years, that's not a demanding relationship. That's a design. Consider, one more time, a composite figure. We'll call him Tobias. Tobias spent 3 years trying to earn a specific kind of approval from a mentor, Ashworth, who always had one more condition. Hit the sales target, and suddenly the target wasn't really the point. It was initiative. Show initiative, and suddenly initiative wasn't enough without polish. Develop polish, and there was always a next thing. Tobias kept adapting, kept stretching, certain that the next version of himself would finally be the one that satisfied the bar. It never was, because the bar was never actually fixed to begin with. It was fixed to Tobias's current position, permanently a few steps ahead of wherever he stood. What ended it wasn't reaching some final, sufficient version of himself. It was Tobias asking, plainly, in a single conversation, what is the actual specific bar in writing that gets me there? And watching Ashworth fail, for the first time, to produce one. That failure was the answer. There had never been a fixed target. There had only been motion, and Tobias supplying the fuel for it. What made this especially hard for Tobias to see while he was in it was that each individual new requirement always sounded reasonable in isolation. Of course, initiative matters. Of course, polish matters. It was only the sequence, target met, condition added, condition met, new condition added, stretched across 3 years, that revealed the actual structure underneath the reasonable sounding parts. This is often true of moving goalposts generally. No single relocation looks unfair on its own. It's the pattern across time, not any individual moment, that tells the real story. The strategic response is to define your own objective independently, in advance, and hold it as the real measure, rather than accepting a moving target defined entirely by someone else's reaction to your last move. You are allowed to decide, on your own terms, what enough looks like. You do not need someone else's permission to stop running toward a horizon they control. One practical version of this discipline: before you commit significant effort towards satisfying someone else's expectation, ask for the specific, fixed definition of what satisfying it will actually look like, in advance, ideally in writing. Not as an accusation, simply as a reasonable request for clarity. What you learn from the answer, or the absence of one, tells you almost everything you need to know. A genuine standard can usually be stated plainly, because it was never designed to move. A moving goalpost, when asked to define itself in advance, tends to stay strangely vague, because vagueness is what allows it to keep relocating. That single question, asked calmly and directly, is often enough to reveal which kind of situation you're actually standing in. Resolution and integration here is what all 7 signs share. Once you see them side by side, None of them are really about the other person's cleverness. They are about your position, whether you are standing on ground you understand, holding a memory you trust, running toward an objective you defined yourself, or, instead, standing on shifting terrain, doubting your own eyes, and sprinting toward a horizon someone else keeps redrawing. This is why Sun Tzu's teaching begins and ends with the self, not the opponent. Every tactic we've walked through today, the manufactured urgency, the demand for endless explanation, the shifting ground, the deliberate provocation, the test of withdrawal, the quiet erosion of your own memory, the moving goalposts, every single one of them only works on a mind that hasn't yet secured its own internal position. They are not really attacks on you. They are attacks on the gap between you and your own clarity. Close that gap, and most of these tactics stop functioning entirely, the way a lever stops working the moment there's nothing left for it to pull. Notice, too, what this composed strength is not. It is not coldness. It is not withdrawing from every relationship that has ever asked something difficult of you. It is not treating every disagreement as an attack or every request as a manipulation. Sun Tzu never taught his generals to see enemies everywhere. He taught them to see clearly, which sometimes means recognizing an honest ally, an honest mistake, an honest need for more time from you. The discipline here is not suspicion, it's clarity. And clarity, applied honestly, will tell you the difference between someone testing your boundaries and someone simply, humanly, asking for patience. What changes once you've internalized these 7 signs is not how loud you are in conflict, it's how little conflict is required to move you off ground you've decided to hold. The urgency doesn't rush you because you've already asked whose deadline it really is. The demand for endless explanation doesn't drain you because you've already said your piece once, clearly, and you no longer feel obligated to keep restating it. The shifting terrain doesn't disorient you because you know exactly where you're standing and you keep returning there, calmly, as many times as it takes. The provocation doesn't detonate you because you can name the bait the instant you feel it, and naming it drains it of its power. The withdrawal doesn't send you sprinting because you've learned that not every gap is yours to close. The doubt about your own memory doesn't take root because you've already secured that ground privately, on your own terms, independent of anyone's agreement. And the moving goalpost doesn't exhaust you because you've defined your own finish line and you're no longer racing towards someone else's. This is what Sun Tzu meant by victory achieved before the battle is fought. It isn't a triumphant moment, applause, someone finally admitting they were wrong. Often, nobody outside of you will ever know the battle happened at all. The victory is quieter than that, and more permanent than that. It's the version of you who walks into the next difficult conversation already standing on ground that doesn't move, not because the world got easier, but because you did the work, once, of knowing exactly where you stand, exactly what you saw, and exactly what you will and will not accept as the price of someone else's approval. That composure doesn't come from becoming harder. It comes from becoming clearer. And clarity, once it's genuinely yours, is very hard for anyone to take back. There's one more thing worth saying plainly. Because it's easy to lose in a video built around signs and tactics and countermeasures, none of this is about becoming someone who sees every relationship as a chessboard. Most of the people in your life are not running any of these 7 patterns against you. Most disagreements are just disagreements. Most silence is just someone tired, or busy, or thinking. Most deadlines are real. The purpose of learning to recognize these 7 signs isn't to view everyone with suspicion. It's the opposite. It's to free up your trust for the people who've actually earned it by no longer spending that trust automatically on situations that don't deserve it. A person who can tell the difference between an honest request and a manufactured one is not more guarded in the end. They're more able to be genuinely open, precisely because they're no longer bracing, by default, against everyone. You'll also find, somewhat unexpectedly, that the people who were never manipulating you at all respond very well to this new steadiness. Honest people are rarely threatened by someone who takes an hour before responding, states their position once and holds it, stays anchored to the actual topic, declines to be provoked, doesn't panic at a little distance, trusts their own memory, and knows their own finish line. Those are simply the traits of someone secure in themselves. It's only the patterns built on your reactivity, your self-doubt, and your chasing that lose their footing when you stop supplying the raw material they were built on. Watch, over time, which relationships get easier under this new steadiness, and which ones get harder. That difference, more than anything Sun Tzu ever wrote, will tell you exactly what you were actually dealing with all along. You may still find yourself, some evening, replaying a conversation, trying to locate the exact moment it turned. That instinct isn't paranoia, it's information. Trust it enough to look closely, and then trust yourself enough to act on what you find, without needing anyone else's permission to believe your own eyes. If this kind of thinking is useful to you, the slow, patient work of reading a situation clearly instead of reacting to it, this channel exists as an ongoing practice, not a single lesson. Stay if you want company while you build it. Come back when you need to re-anchor. This is a discipline, not a destination, and it's one worth returning to, together, one clear-eyed conversation at a time. You don't have to apply all 7 of these at once, and you don't have to get any of them perfectly the first time you try. Pick the one sign that felt most familiar as you listened today. The manufactured urgency, the endless explaining, the shifting ground, the provocation, the withdrawal, the doubted memory, the moving goalpost, and simply notice it. Once, the next time it appears. Noticing before responding is most of the discipline. The rest builds itself, one steady conversation at a time. Because the truth is simple, even if living it takes patience, you were never the one who failed to see clearly. You were only ever missing the map. Now you have it, 7 signs you are being manipulated, and Sun Tzu's exact response to each one. Ready whenever you need to stand your ground again.